All right, today we're doing calories in, calories out, and a bit of physics again. A bonus, you'll also get to see a carve-up of Mike Izraetel from Renaissance Periodization.
Ended up being like, when you pull away from a hug and both of you catch eyes for a sec and you had this thing where you're like, well, we shouldn't kiss. That would be crazy. It would be crazy if we just made out right now. It would be crazy if we held each other just for a little second longer than society wants us to.
Stick around. Here it comes. When I put my earpiece back in. Fuck's sake.
Hey folks, Dr. Mike here for Renaissance Periodization. And it turns out that calories in, calories out is a myth. This is not how the world works, man.
Correct. And you should probably end your video there, Mike, and then we'll finish the day getting along famously and agreeing on all matters. But I detect a slight twinge of sarcasm in your dulcet tonage there. As such, let's hear it. Come on.
It turns out that hormones and keto and magic. Wait, no.
Not the last thing. The first 2 years, they do have an impact.
No, Kaiko's not a myth, and the idea that it's a myth is BS. I'll save swearing for the end of this.
Kaiko, he pronounced it. Kaiko, we prefer, Mike, to pronounce it psycho for obvious reasons. And so what you're suggesting is it's not a myth. Well, that's interesting, Mike, because it's just 3 words. One of them used twice, making a total of 4. There's no information in those 4 words put together in that order. You have to apply a context. And in so doing, that's where you've made your error. But we'll get to that.
So the idea that calories in, calories out is a myth is promulgated and propagated by various folks in the fitness industry.
So there are some people saying a thing. Good.
And it turns out that it's not a myth.
Oh, all right then, Mike. Because you say so, case closed. It's not a myth. Even though it's just 4 words with no context. The usual context, by the way, that this CICO thing is thrown around in is in the maintenance or alteration to one's body composition or in predicting what will happen in that regard over time, tracking these mythical entities called calories. They're real. We'll get to what they are soon. Don't worry. It's all under control, kittens.
So let's get into the reality.
Oh, realities, Michael. Fantastic. I can't wait. I love reality. Perhaps you would join us over here in reality at some point, Michael. That would be great. Anyway, that's for another day.
First, calories in, calories out is essentially covered in the mass energy conservation principle, aka the first law of thermodynamics.
No, it isn't, Michael. That's basically a fundamental misrepresentation of fact. It shows also a fundamental lack of understanding on your part of what the first law of thermodynamics is and what it says. Okay, so let's go over that quickly. The first law of thermodynamics is a case-limited example derived from the law of conservation of energy. The case limitation that is imposed by very definition in the first law of thermodynamics is in the case where a system is thermodynamically isolated. There are 3 levels of energy transmissibility. They are thermodynamically isolated, which is an idealized system which exists only in theory. It is a system that does not allow energy to enter, nor exit, nor mass to enter, nor exit. Isolated system. That is the example that the first law is formulated upon. And therefore, that is the context to which it speaks. A thermodynamically closed system is one that does not allow the transmission of mass across its boundary, but it does allow energy to come in and out. A thermodynamically open system allows both mass and energy to cross the border, the boundary, in or out. That is the context in which you need to deal with a biological system, including human beings, not the isolated system. Ergo, the first law does not apply, and nothing that occurs at the biological level breaches the first law anyway, which remains true, although nonetheless irrelevant. What's next?
And that first law of thermodynamics, to my virgin eyes, perusing the literature, has yet to be broken ever in any system, definitely in a biological system.
Absolutely, because the first law does not apply in that situation. So it can't be breached there.
And in all studied systems.
Read it again, Michael. The first law of thermodynamics, Michael, states quite explicitly that delta U is equal to Q minus W. Well, that's all it says, by the way. Nothing else. Nothing at all. Just that. Let's operationally define what those variables are. Well, U is the internal energy of an isolated thermodynamic system, of which human beings are not an example, Mike. So the law doesn't apply to a human being. Ergo, neither can it be breached, broken, or vandalized in any way there. Actually, it's just not applicable. So cool.
So far. Just seems to be never, ever broken.
Right. That's why it's called the law, because it applies. It applies in its context. Isolated thermodynamic system.
But a lot of people say, but it doesn't apply in biological systems, and they're wrong.
No, they're not, Michael.
But how did they get this wrong?
They didn't. You did, Mike.
It turns out it's pretty tempting to get this wrong because of a couple of, illusory things that can occur. Here are a few of them. First, when people say, look, I know Kaiko is real, calories in, calories out, Kaiko. It's like Geico.
Psycho.
Except no gecko, or you eat the gecko. He's so nice and British. And all of a sudden, there's a pole through his body, and you're rotating him. And don't worry, he's already dead. But he's just like, just sizzling. He probably tastes pretty good. In any case, people say, look, I know Kaiko is real, but I ate a crap ton of calories for months. I didn't gain weight. And another time, I ate almost nothing and I gained weight. And it turns out that people are just really bad on average. Tons of exceptions, of course, and you're one of them, of accounting for diet and activity. And they're just really bad at tracking.
Even if you have all the resources at your disposal, labs, PhDs to run those labs for you, the best kit imaginable for this very purpose, even if you are able to get anywhere near accurately assessing, putting a metric on the amount of calories either consumed or used, good luck to you. That's before we talk about the fact that nutrition labels are allowed to be out by 20% plus or minus, so a range of 40%. Well, we'll leave that for another day because we don't need it right now, although it's a fact.
So they'll think they ate something where in reality they forgot it was this much versus that much. They mismeasured. They say they...
Yeah, but even if they measure correctly, Mike, there's still an issue. How representative of what goes on in a human body is an exchange of so-called calories? How well does that represent what the energetic needs of the person were?
They did 30 minutes of cardio, but they reduced their daily walking and they never measure that. So because they misconstrued it, they say, hey, look, typical thing I'll see on social media is someone will be like, look, I've been in a surplus, but I'm not gaining.
A surplus of what? Calories? Calories are photons of light. Calories are the measurement of the effects of photons of light on a physical thing, that being a body of water of a certain weight, surrounding a bomb calorimeter, thus reacting to the heat thrown off by the bomb calorimeter, absorbing that heat into itself and raising itself in temperature. Calories are a measurement of heat energy specifically, explicitly, and operationally defined as such. The walls of the bomb calorimeter communicate the heat to the water by means of the exchange of pseudophotons between valence electrons, and in no other way. It's passing on of a form of kinetic energy from one body to another body, according to the second law of thermodynamics, which talks about entropy. Now, last time I checked, my body temperature was 37 degrees C. It very rarely does it deviate much from 37 degrees C, meaning if you're going to use heat as a proxy for how much energy my body is losing to entropy, that is going to introduce an error. Quite a big one. Because that's all photons. Now, Mike, please tell me, what is the rest mass of a photon? That's right, 0. So if your mass was 100 kilograms, Mike, the addition of any number of photons to your mass, energy in the form of heat energy, calories, add any number of photons you want. 1 billion, Mike. 1 billion times 0 plus 100 kilos, it's the same, isn't it? Hasn't changed. What if you're exuding a bunch of photons? Does that change your weight? No, not by a single gram. Ever. The only way to gain or lose mass off your body without surgically intervening is to exchange that mass with the external environment outside the boundary of your body. How do you do that? Well, when carbohydrate, fats, sometimes amino acids that have been deaminated first, occasionally alcohol, hopefully occasionally, when those physical bits of matter, that mass, when that is reacted chemically in the body in a certain way to produce so-called energy for the body, what is produced out of those chemical reactions are two end products, those being CO2, carbon dioxide gas, and H2O, water. The carbon dioxide gas diffuses out of the body according to several diffusion and concentration gradients along the way. Basically, it's breathed out at the lungs, and it weighs something. It has mass. Breathing out causes you to weigh less having breathed out than you did before you breathed out, by that very infinitesimal amount of mass, but mass nonetheless. What happens to the water? It remains in your body for an indeterminate period of time before it's passed out of your body, in the urine, in the feces, as a vapor at the lungs, in your sweat, in your tears. That is how you lose weight. Not by exuding photons, Michael. Your body composition is absolutely, definitely, unequivocally a mass in, mass out equation, not calories in, calories out at all. And now the problem becomes accounting for the mass, thus eliminating the errors of converting mass to energy before talking about it. Because we know there's the sum by which you can convert mass to energy that Einstein came up with, but that's not applicable here because we're not actually changing matter into energy. The same amount of matter leaves our body at some point as entered. That's not even about energy, is it? The energy in the body is stable over time, the internal energy, even though the body is open. Anyway, make some progress, Mike.
How do you know you're a surplus? Assumption, 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 incorrect 3 assumptions. They're not really in a surplus. So that's definitely a thing that happens. Next, people assume a stable metabolic rate when that rate can actually change.
Anybody that understands metabolism understands that its rate changes, Mike. It's one of the issues, one of the problems, if you're trying to account for either energy or mass as a predictor for body composition changes over time to come.
For example, if you are low on thyroid hormones, it can look like calories in, calories out doesn't work.
Calories in, calories out doesn't work, Michael. Precisely because there is no way a person can even remotely acceptably account for calories in within a range of accuracy that makes it of any utility at all to even attempt. The same applies for calories out. How are you going to actually account definitely for how many so-called calories you have lost? This is not a tool that can be used by the person from the street with utility. The only way to make this thing work, if you're using it as a tool, is to so vastly grossly undereat as to render yourself quite likely to suffer some side effects of deficiencies variously. And some of those effects can be very, very serious, up to and including death. This is not a tool that we can use at home. Calories in, calories out. No.
Except the calories out part is way down because your thyroid stopped working. And when you get on thyroid medication, all of a sudden, calories in, calories out works again. It was never the calories in, calories out that was the problem.
It was because of its inability to act as a tool of utility for people. And these kind of videos, Mike, are disinformation because you are failing to make that clear to people.
It was the fact that your hormonal systems were no longer pushing up that calories out part of the equation.
So you're making basically excuses for psycho instead of just accepting that the very real problems you're talking about are the very substance which undercuts and erodes calories in, calories out as a tool of utility for people.
Water weight, another.
There we go. The largest component of your weight overall is water. It's also one of the most easily changed. You can drink quite a large amount of water in one sitting. Indeed, across time, you can drink a lot. You can urinate quite a bit out in one sitting. You can cause yourself to sweat and lose a lot of weight that way.
Other culprit. Water weight is humongous in this case because people will assume that their body weight and tissue is the same thing, that they're reflexive proxy variables of each other.
Well, people assume that, if they're allowed to assume that, Michael, because they lack having been educated appropriately by someone who will tell them that weight and body composition, while there is a relationship, they're not the same variable. Anyone with any exposure to what is understood in this area understands that. Weight and body comp, not the same thing. Cool.
So what they'll say is, I ate this many calories and I just didn't lose weight.
Well, A, you don't know how many so-called calories you so-called ate. And secondly, actually, you can't eat calories because calories are photons of light. What you ate was some mass in the form of food.
All right. But is that because you're storing more body water over time? Because you're eating more salty foods? You're drinking more fluids? Time of the month? Who knows? Or is it because you're just not burning any more tissue? Because it's probably not the
burning is not a great word to use describing the effects of metabolism on food. I get why it's used. It's just not a great word.
Burning tissue stuff. When I've had clients in the past fix their body water issues, usually by starting to track their fluid and sodium and realizing, holy crap, I've just been increasing this for a while because I'm so hungry that I just drink a bunch of diet drinks because they're sugary and I want more of that. And I'm eating a bunch of salt and because it tastes good. And then it turns out I was gaining body water this whole time. And as soon as that flushed out, hey, I'd lost 5 pounds over the past 5 weeks, just like thermodynamics would have expected.
Thermodynamics places no expectation whatsoever on open thermodynamic systems. The first law of thermodynamics applies only to isolated thermodynamic systems, not open ones. So it expects nothing and it's not disappointed.
Another thing is assuming a stability in digestion where there's definitely some flux going on.
Ah. So some of the matter consumed, eaten, is not digested. Okay. Interesting.
Some foods are harder or easier.
In other words, do people who are doing CICO at home to make sure that they're going to lose weight, do they put their leavings, their excrement, do they put those in a bomb calorimeter and measure how much energy was in those to take that either off the in or add it to the out? Do they do that, Mike?
To digest, and there's not a one-to-one pairing of things that go into the mouth and things that end up getting anabolized into your tissues.
So we're told that calories in, calories out is correct and a tool of utility that we can use. Mike, you've just given us sufficient reasoning to dismiss it right there. Oh, not everything that we eat is absorbed, and we've got really no way of gauging that at home. Oh, thyroid function might play a role. Oh, all sorts of things make this inaccurate, vastly, hugely, grossly inaccurate, wildly inaccurate, such that the usual advice from calories in, calories out practitioners for people is to eat a so-called deficit of so-called calories around about 500 a day for an extended period of time. That's how you'll lose weight, they say. Oh.
Like, well, like when you eat almonds, some of them may digest at a much less and you poop a lot of them out versus fat is presented as an oil or a butter. So when you read the labels, it's off. And that's why calories in, calories out is inaccurate or doesn't work. And it's like, that's a calorie label problem and a food processing problem. Those calories, that doesn't mean into your mouth. It means into your system. Most of what you eat.
So how are we going to do that at home, Mike? How are we going to get any kind of metric on? How are we going to gauge how many calories we are, in effect, genuinely absorbing?
Most of what you eat in your mouth ends up in the system, a huge fraction of it, but with some foods, it's a little less and more than you would expect. So it turns out that, I don't know of anyone that had trouble losing weight because they were eating nuts and didn't know about it or something, but on the margins, there are little idiosyncrasies you can point out. They do not refute CICO. They just say that, well, look, calories in means calories in processed by the system. And if you're pooping them out, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out, like, well, yeah, except for the stuff you poop out. So,
well, who's measuring that at home in their CICO calculations, Mike? Who's doing that?
Theoretically, there's no problem with calories in, calories out.
And there is when you propose that it's a tool of utility for people at home and it's a way they should gauge or predict anything or use as a tool to make changes predictably.
And a lot of people will misconstrue body composition changes for first law of thermodynamics violation.
How? There is no violation of the first law of thermodynamics with respect to anything occurring in a biological system. It does not apply here. The first law is explicit, clear, and case limited in its very definition. Still,
they say, well, look, you're saying calories in, calories out works. Explain this. I ate a super keto diet with tons of veggies and lean meats. I started at 200 pounds. And I ended at 200 pounds, except I was shredded and more jacked. Like, I got you. Did you start TRT? Well, yeah, I did. Okay. Did you start lifting weights 6 times a week, man? RP hypertrophy app. Like, oh, my man, a satisfied customer. Thank you so much, sir. You built a bunch of muscle and burnt a bunch of fat. Your mass is still the same because you were eating at maintenance. And like, oh, yeah, all right. So I guess CICO really is real. Bring it in, baby.
Okay, number one, great story there, Mike. Probably more emphasis on the dragons next time, perhaps a bit less incest. However, what have you just said scientifically there? What evidence have you just given us, oh great master of science that you are, that we should be convinced by what you've said scientifically? Nothing. Okay, good.
We hugged it out. Ended up being like, when you pull away from a hug and both of you catch eyes for a sec and you had this thing where you're like, we shouldn't kiss. That would be crazy. It would be crazy if we just made out right now. It would be crazy if we held each other just for a little second longer than society wants us to. That would be nuts. Why would we do that? So,
sometimes things get edited out of videos, Mike. That might have been an idea.
him and I had that little dynamic, and he was a good man. Jesus. So the TLDR of all this is people get the calories inside wrong with bad assumptions.
Yes.
They get the state transformations in the body wrong, muscle and fat and vice versa.
Yes.
And they get the out wrong because they misestimate their activity in thermogenesis and hormonal burning.
Yes. All reasons why this thing is so inaccurate in terms of its actual traceable effect in the universe as a gauge of the likelihood of that it's of no utility. That's the point here, Mike. Your body composition, ergo, to some degree, your weight, your mass, are absolutely mass exchange activity, not exchange of so-called energy. That's really the point here.
Kaiko is as real as it gets.
Only in theory. That's the point. In practice, it's no good. And it falls down because, if for no other reason, the first two words, calories in. Okay, well, you can't take in calories and use those for energy. That's not what the human body, that's not the currency of energy that the human body runs on. The human body releases an amount of heat as an entropic loss. It's pretty much in line with the energy so-called coming in, according to the law of conservation of energy, actually. What's happening is the human body is actually increasing the entropy of that energy as that energy passes through that person's body and releasing the same amount that was consumed. So actually the human body is an entropy machine. It's a machine relying upon receiving substrate at low relative entropy and increasing the entropy in a short period and then exuding the energy back to whence it came, using a very rough, very inaccurate guide of energy intake as a predictor of what will happen to your mass balance and specific parts of your mass balance, fat, water, protein, whatever, is ludicrous, unscientific, reductionist, inaccurate, and foolish. That's the context of this calories in, calories out thing.
But in the real world of assumption and measurement, sometimes you got to be patient to see it working out.
So therefore, what you need to do is vastly grossly undereat by 500 so-called heat units, calories, every day. For how long, Mike? How long do I do that for? To predictably lose weight.
And you have to make sure that your assumptions are what they are. Be patient, plug in the right calories.
How do I do that, Michael? That's the whole point. Please provide instruction on how I get my calories in correct for whatever my goal is, maintenance, loss, or gain.
If after a few weeks you don't see the changes, don't think Kaiko doesn't work. Just lower or raise your calories to what you think they should be to make your weight go up or down.
Right, so experiment and piss around for weeks and weeks and weeks, manipulating the amount of actually mass you're consuming is what you're actually doing. Nothing to do with energy. Okay? So putting an energy value, so-called, on a given amount of a given food is a fallacy. because the format of energy that the human body latches onto and changes a bit is that energy in the matter, the mass, the food. Releasing that energy to entropy in a bomb calorimeter, number one, doesn't gauge the way the human body releases energy accurately. And number two, actually that energy, so-called, only exists, so-called, at the time you release it to entropy. And that's not what the human body does with a fair portion of the food that it consumes.
Then you've got a winning formula. And hey, before I leave, when you have an opportunity to come in for that second hug and make the grand gesture, do it. You can only love truly once in your life. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Bullshit. Lying. See you later.
All right. There we go. Mike Izraetel with his take on calories in, calories out. Pretty light on actual science there, Mike. You made a bunch of assertions, which you then relied entirely upon appeal to authority, really, as being of any veracity or correctness in the universe, and that you've interpreted those things correctly. Sorry, you haven't. This is a much wider discussion. There's quite a bit of nuance here. Perhaps you'd like to discuss it with me face to face someday, Mike. That'd be great. And then we can talk it out, and perhaps we can have that man hug that you seem to desperately want. See you then. Ciao for now.